Good morning, everybody. It's 9:45 a.m. Pacific time on October 27th. October 27th, we are now 9 days from election day. Certainly, election's been going on all over America for several weeks, but the election ends in 9 days. And today is a day in which Donald Trump makes a statement about what he believes and what he wants to tell America. He's been not subtle for some time about who he is. In fact, he's been fairly what is it? Explicit? No, definitely explicit. Fairly air hornish in his positions on immigrants and women and Black people generally, and anybody who really disagrees with them, including military veterans who are suckers and losers in his perspective. But today he makes a symbolic decision to go and speak at Madison Square Garden in New York City. And Madison Square Garden is considered by many to be kind of the most famous stadium or arena in the world, given the things that have occurred there and the symbolism in New York City. So to go to New York City and to Madison Square Garden is not a light decision. Whatever his motives might be, and we're going to discuss them here, it's not a decision that one just reaches lightly at this moment. For the last couple of days in the podcast, we've been talking about the symbolism of where Kamala Harris has chosen to speak and with whom. She spoke in Ripon, Wisconsin with Liz Cheney, the birthplace of the Republican Party in 1854, to symbolize her desire to work across the aisle. When Barack Obama announced his presidential campaign in 2007, he went and spoke at the old state capitol in Illinois to symbolize his connection to the famous speech that Abraham Lincoln had given there in 1858, the America is a house divided and will not stand as a house divided symbolism. When Ronald Reagan, as much as I might politically disagree with him, spoke at the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, in West Berlin in 1987 and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." He did it at a certain place to make a certain point. All right. Today, Donald Trump goes to Madison Square Garden, and there might be a couple different interpretations of why this is, and we're going to talk about them. One might be the dude is a New York dude, and he wants that high stage, that high profile, because he feeds on that energy and that adulation. Another perspective is the one that I want to wholeheartedly put my finger down on, to say that this is the way that I read this. And I think 9 years into Donald Trump, it would be a mistake to not read him this way. And that is this. In 1939, the German-American Bund Party, which was the pro-Nazi American group in the United States, held a rally in Madison Square Garden. It was in February of 1939. In fact, I've got an image here, and I'm joined here by Hanson Hossein, who's going to help us to think through all of this, given his wisdom, his knowledge about storytelling and narratives. And he may not agree with me at every step of the way. He will be wrong, but he will. This will be a good conversation. But I want to start here and show this image of that moment at Madison Square Garden in 1939. This is the stage there in 1939, and it's George Washington in the middle, flanked on the left and the right by two swastikas. All right, those are swastikas there, right underneath the 1939 caption on the left, and also the parallel vertical space on the right. The flags across the stage are an intertwining of American flags and Nazi flags. And you can see that there are New York police in this photograph, and there is also very clearly someone in a brown shirt, Nazi military garb, right up front. That's the 1939 Madison Square Garden address by the American Nazi supporters. They chose to go there in February, and they put it on the day of George Washington's birthday because they sought to connect that man, George Washington, with that man in Germany, Adolf Hitler. And they gave a pro-Aryan rally and cry there and invoked all of the kind of white-only kind of language that Donald Trump has gone right up to the line in terms of articulating for the last many, many years. They came there. To go to Madison Square Garden to give a political rally, given all of the things that Donald Trump has done and has said about America and about immigrants and about throwing them out and deporting them, and about, as we've had confirmed from John Kelly, his former chief of staff, about Hitler, he wanted Trump wanting generals like Hitler had, and that Hitler did some good things. To go there at this moment is definitively, in my view, to put a stamp on what Donald Trump is trying to tell America. But he isn't just going there by himself. There has been the call put out into conservative circles to have all of the folks who align with him to be there, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and so on. And so today I want to just open this piece with that moment in 1939, and also to read and to share this editorial, this op-ed written in a Jewish independent newspaper, The Forward, by an American veteran who speaks to why he will be there today protesting Donald Trump's presence. So he says, I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. Here's why I'm protesting Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. Trump's fear-mongering rhetoric, with echoes of Madison Square Garden's 1939 pro-Hitler gathering, beckons extremist groups. And he goes down to talk for a bit, and I just want to crystallize it here. A man who flirts with neo-Nazis at his Mar-a-Lago pleasure palace and has commented positively on Hitler, according to his ex-White House chief of staff, knows exactly what he's doing by summoning his supporters to the same venue that held a German-American Bund rally before World War II. In February 1939, over 20,000 Americans gathered at Madison Square Garden to support Hitler in a shocking display, intertwining American nationalism, swastikas, and images of George Washington. Hijacking Washington's birthday, they advocated for a, quote, white-only America, unquote, and included a Pledge of Allegiance, posters stating, stop Jewish domination of Christian America, uniformed stormtroopers, and speakers denouncing Jewish refugees and praising American racism, like the anti-miscegenation laws, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and Jim Crow policies. It's always been American to protect the Aryan character of this country, declared one speaker. Does any of this sound familiar? It should. Trump's rhetoric echoes the same dangerous themes. He frames immigrants as invaders, journalists as enemies of the state, and political opponents as existential threats to America's future. This is the same playbook authoritarian leaders have used for centuries. I'm almost done here with my kind of laying out the context here. But because it wasn't only the German-American Bund in 1939 that have made Madison Square Garden famous politically. Franklin Roosevelt spoke there also as part of his convention speech in when he was running for the president. But he was the governor of New York. He'd been and spoken in New York many, many times. Also, in 1968, George Wallace went to Madison Square Garden and spoke on October 24th, just 3 days ago, spoke on October 24th, 1968, to make his point that his position, his view of a white America, of a lost cause America, of a racially hierarchical America had standing in the greatest city on the earth, New York City. So to go to Madison Square Garden is what I'll call a seminal or a crucial storytelling moment. To go there does not occur. It does not get undertaken by somebody who doesn't wish to tell a certain message. My point this day in this podcast is that Donald Trump is telling us exactly who he is. He has done it before. He is doing it again right now. And we cannot doubt this. All right, we must vote accordingly. So I've asked Hanson Hossein to come because Hanson and I have worked together for a number of years over time, and I've always valued his insights and his positions around storytelling and narratives and values. We don't always see things exactly the same way, and I respect that. But Hanson, you've just heard my argument about the story that Donald Trump is telling us here. Story that to me is real. It is cemented. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, let's continue with your framing, David, especially with those historic photographs. From the moment that I actually heard that Trump was going to be speaking near the end of his campaign at Madison Square Garden, I knew it was going to be about the venue and the story. This was his moment to powerfully convey something. And as we know, Madison Square Garden, as you said, this is not just a national stage, it's an international stage. It's an act of pageantry, right? This is a
Mm-hmm.
pageant, not a high school pageant, but a pageant that sort of conveys something really powerful. And I think, as I was looking at that photograph that you shared from 1939, it'll be very telling to see how that stage is designed behind Trump.
Yeah.
I suspect there will be echoes of what you've showed. There'll be flags, there'll be imagery, there'll be a sense of strength and power coming from him. I was on your podcast last week, and I mentioned that I believe that the Trump campaign was setting thousands of little Reichstag fires, which comes back yet again to the 1930s and how the Nazi Party was trying to manufacture crises at home to blame it on the communists so that they would take power. And I think this is just a direct connection to that. He is returning to his hometown, the place where his power truly is, and he wants to convey a story of massive strength through the pageantry of being on stage at Madison Square Garden. And as you mentioned, that the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers are being invited, we know that the primary message he wants to convey in New York will be about migrants and somehow migrants taking over New York City, which frankly has
Mm.
always been the case. I used to live in New York City. That's the joy of New York, right? But he's trying to show them as the enemy within taking over the place that he calls home. And so that's the way I see the story that he wants to convey. And when I get back to that first point that I made, when I heard about Madison Square Garden as the venue, I realized that this was his swan song. One way or the other, whether he wins or not,
Mm.
is the place that he wants to claim and how he wants to claim it.
Let's take this in the most benign way. Okay, let's
Okay.
take it in the most racially benign way, and approach this as merely a political spectacle. All right, which has got its own strategic value to it. But let's just talk about that first of all, from the pure political spectacle value, without a racial ideological component to it. Let's interpret it that way. What's your perspective on why Trump's doing it from that perspective?
Look, Trump's halcyon days in New York City were the late 70s and 80s, where he was lauded by rappers and movies. And you can think of, if you want to go benign, let's think of Billy Joel's song, A New York State of Mind, right? We associate Trump with the New York state of mind before he entered the political arena. And so the most benign thing I see here is that Trump is trying to essentially reclaim his story. That New York is inextricably linked to his success and his rise, and he's been booted out of New York in the last few years. He created his alternative White House in Florida, but ultimately he is a New Yorker. He's a Queens boy, and he wants to claim that again. He knows that's his source of power, and so for him to be able to recalibrate, even though we know that this is blue state, par excellence. This is not a strategic move. This is an emotional move, and this is a vibe move for him that will radiate outwards because of that pageantry and hit Pennsylvania and all those other places he's fighting.
So if he does that, if that's the things, what is the message you would expect to hear from him tonight that would accentuate that line of interpretation of Trump being there?
I think he'll reiterate his success story. A lot of people who are concerned about the economy will say, well, Trump knows how to do business, and this is where he did business. So he will reconnect himself and realign himself to those small stories that we remember about Trump appearing in Home Alone 2, or, being referenced in certain songs during the 80s and 90s. And so I think he'll make that connection. Then he'll quickly pivot to saying, man, what look at this place now. Look how
Yeah.
bad it's
Uh-huh.
become.
Uh-huh.
And then he'll go straight down that migrant road.
So you would say that he will try to capture the grandiosity of New York City and further and attach it to himself because that's how he wants to present, convey, and also how he sees himself. He's going to do
That's right.
that.
That's a place for his glory days, right?
Sure. And also, speaking in New York, he would then say that this great place where it was so great when I was here, right? And this is where you come to make yourself, then has symbolizes the American, what he calls the new garbage can of America, right? The decline of this country.
That's right. And there's that also that you mentioned it, that fundamental narrative to New York, which is about self-made men. And we know that Trump is really pushing hard for the young man vote, for maybe the brown and black man vote. And New York City allows him to hit that kind of diversity, at least on the masculine side, associating it with strength and power and his own strength and story.
Okay. Okay. Now, I think at a visceral level, at this core to who he is level, that Trump is wanting all of that to go to New York. I think that fundamentally he's about ego and the ability to go to New York and to say, I made it big. And now you all screwed up, and that's why I went to Florida, the new place we all should go. That kind of America. And I have been to Madison Square Garden twice, and there is this aura of going, certainly for someone like myself who studies the kind of what I have in some of my research have called kind of civic pilgrimages, where people go to iconic locations, whether it's a wartime location, a Normandy, a Gettysburg, or a athletic kind of stadium, to go to a place like Yankee Stadium in New York. That these places hold enormous meaning for people who are connected with those locations. And so I think that Trump does at a deep level want see himself in that light and want that.
And in addition, David, it's not just Madison Square Garden. It's where Madison Square Garden is. It's the media capital, not just of the United States, but of the world. And if anything, we know that Trump is a creature and creation of the media. He has mastered it. He is defined by it. And for him to control those, to be able to actually be the center of attention, yet again, in the place where attention matters most, this really aligns with everything that he's been and he wants to be and continues to want to be.
Yeah. So I think that all of that is there. And I believe that this moment in time, that he has run a campaign that is so aligned with the themes of white supremacy and Nazism and Aryan dominance that do echo from the Confederacy to Nazi Germany through George Wallace to Donald Trump. That if you're trying to draw through lines, if you're trying to connect to people and show them that you would pick a place that is where the largest pro-Nazi American rally ever was held, and where George Wallace spoke in 1968, that you would go there and you would build a campaign around Make America Great Again, which is code for Make America White Again. All right. And you would make a campaign around getting rid of migrants and people who don't love this country. All right. And you would make a campaign around the enemies within, the argument that there are people trying to take down you. You would say as a candidate that I want to be a dictator on day one. You would talk about the great purge of giving police one day to beat the heck out of everybody in this country who doesn't buy into those perspectives. You would talk about removing the powers of free speech and free press in this country. You would do all of these things. This is what you would do if you were going to run that campaign and run that message. So in order for us to not buy that this is what he intends to do, we have to say that he just happened to stumble on all of these dimensions and somehow just showed up in New York City out of pure New York interest and pure ego for New York, that he just showed up there. And I will not buy that at this point in the Trump Odyssey. I will not buy that. I take him literally, and I take him seriously. And so Donald Trump going there, to me, it's about an ego move, but is attempting to connect himself to two Mount Rushmore figures in the white supremacy icon, Adolf Hitler and George Wallace. And he goes there and he says, look at me, I'm one of them. And I expect him tonight to give us the most racist thing he's delivered in his campaign. I expect him to use New York as the fodder for this, but to give us the most racist demands, to not invoke Hitler, to not do that, but to invoke this notion of America was great and we should go back. He has referenced this greatness in terms of going back to that white America. So to me, to go there is to adopt the Maya Angelou phrase that when people tell you who they are, you got to believe them. All right. So tonight, to me, this is a symbolic moment that matters. And the reason it matters is it matters to us today. It matters now for us as citizens. How do we respond to that? So I fall in that camp that Trump knows what he's doing at a deep level, a visceral level.
And I think, David, what you just said, that's for no doubt that's happening. That is a clear appeal directly to his MAGA base. They hear that, they know it, they believe it. What's amazing to me is that there are people who aren't part of that MAGA base who are willing to disregard that truth that you mentioned because they think he doesn't really mean it, or they think that they'll be spared of it depending on what he does when he
Yes.
comes to power.
Yes.
And so the question then is, what is the counter narrative to what Trump is presenting tonight? It'll be interesting to see who shows up outside of Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
I've read the Advance in the past, and I know what their editorial perspective is, and
The
so it
forward, you mean?
doesn't the forward, yeah. It doesn't surprise me that they would actually put that out, and I think that will motivate people to show up. It's interesting seeing how Kamala Harris has been showing up in the last few days, where she's been showing up, and who she's been showing up with. To me, that is the counter narrative to whatever
Uh-huh.
Trump is going to do tonight. It's diversity, it's female, it's ideally more of a narrative of hope that they can do things differently. And they know that they've got to be as loud as Trump. And so we've got this
That's
tit for
interesting.
tat going on right now, right? Because if Kamala shows up with Beyonce in Texas, Trump's got to show up in Madison Square Garden with something equally bigger, because we know audience and scale matters to him. So we are now in the end game of media appearances, narrative, and demonstrating power of appeal. And I want to see what Kamala does next. And I think she's going to be in either Pennsylvania or Washington, D.C. today. And then what happens outside of Madison Square Garden tonight.
I want to pick up a piece that you said that, and then I want to begin to kind of bring us to our closing pieces here. I think that Harris has run a campaign that in the last 10 days has elevated the message that she's trying to bring together of a diverse, unified America. All right, that we can be this, that we can do this. A new way forward, she's called it. But she has gone to all of these places to symbolize this. She is in Philadelphia all day today, getting out the vote. Will there be somewhere in there where she will stop at Independence Hall? Okay, well, that might be the case. All right. But I want to note, like embedded in your thing there, that she has done what Joe Biden, and I don't think any candidate has done since Trump arrived on the scene in 2015. They have matched him megaphone for megaphone. All right. They have done it. They're doing it intentionally. And that is something that I think really, really matters in this moment. So Trump keeps elevating, and at a minimum, he's taken the bait to go to New York City, which he will always do. But the fact that Harris has done this has produced this cataclysm of these two different messages. There is no more subtlety on the left, because Trump does not, if you meet Trump with subtlety, you lose. All right.
And I think I love that line, megaphone for megaphone. And I truly believe that given the short time the Harris campaign has had to
Yeah.
exist, that very clever people from the outset designed that narrative arc for her, recognizing that they would have to have a climax moment to match whatever Trump was doing, whatever attention he was getting. So I suspect that they might have had those endorsements from those pop stars in their pocket from
Yeah.
the first early days, but they said, hold on. We need to spread this out and have a story told. So by the time we get to the end, fireworks are going off and everybody's feeling really good about where we are.
Sure, absolutely. So the Trump going to Madison Square Garden fits the narrative that the Harris campaign wants perfectly too. And we know, we were talking about this before we started the podcast, that clearly that body of leaders in the political space are pushing the argument that look at what Trump's doing. He's going to Madison Square Garden because of the Nazis, because of them, because of George Wallace. I'm sure that's been said to Trump too, okay, by some of his insiders and his people. And he has chosen to go there in a state he's not going to win. So it's not about the politics of winning that state. What tonight would convince you that Donald Trump went there intentionally to invoke the pro-Nazi rally and the George Wallace, let's say our worst devils, instead of our best angels of our nature, the worst devils of our nature? What would convince you of that you could reasonably actually think could happen? So don't take it all the way to like, yeah, he puts a Nazi flag out there, okay? But that you think could reasonably happen?
I think it'll be threefold. It will be the appearance of that stage. If I feel that it's trying to intimidate me, as a non-white person, because of that show of strength and how it does paint a straight line to Nazism. That'll be number one. Number two is who he references in his speech. If he does call out the Proud Boys, if he does call out some of those people who have been really seen as tied to extreme white supremacy, that'll be number two. And number three will just be in the content. If he really focuses more on the enemy within and less on America as a success and how he aligns with that success, that will tell me loud and clear, this is about us versus them. And I intend to do exactly that when I come to power.
Is this the end game? You said that word earlier. Is this the end game?
Yeah.
Like, this is the end game that we inevitably were going to, right? We were never.
This is totally endgame. Endgame in every possible way. And I've watched the Marvel movies too, and I know what I'm saying when I say endgame. On November 6th, everything changes no matter who wins. Joe Biden, gloves come off on Israel because he's no longer constraining himself because he's worried about the outcome of the election. We'll know what's going to happen in Europe with Ukraine, and we're going to know the direction America is going to be taking, and whoever wins, it's going to be a very different direction from what we've experienced over the last 4 years, 10 years, 20 years. Harris will take it in one direction with technology and culture, and Trump will do exactly the opposite. And we're going to be a very different country 2 to 4 years from now.
Trump going to Madison Square Garden feels like that moment, right? It feels like that moment in the same way that Harris on Tuesday gets her moment on the National Mall, right?
That's right. It's a culmination.
It is those two. He's going to
Yeah.
Madison Square Garden for all the reasons that I believe that I've said. And she's going to the National Mall to invoke the National Mall and his January 6th speech, right?
And I can't help but think about his inauguration speech back in 2017, where he lied about the numbers of people who showed up, and very few people did show up. And I suspect that he's still trying to solve for that. And as much as he can have a sold out Madison Square Garden, that is the cure for the perception that most of America is not behind him. He wants to show that popularity.
Yeah. Hey, Hanson, thanks a lot for coming and for helping us to think this through. All right.
My pleasure, Dave. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
See ya. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.